So the first message is starting in verse, let's say verse 2. The Arameans had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she said to her mistress, "If only my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So let's think about this a little bit, and especially the contrast that is laid out between Naaman, he's described in verse 1, commander of the army, great man, high favor with his master, and compared to this woman who we don't have the name of who she is. She's a captive. She doesn't have any power or authority. So verse 1 lays out Naaman as very prominent, powerful, prestigious. And then in verse 2, it's and here's this captive girl. And then she is delivering a message of hope. Now, when I read Scripture, what I really like to do is to picture myself either as a character or as an observer in the account. It just helps it to come alive to me. And so I think about then myself as this young girl who during a war raid had been captured as a prisoner of war, brought into a strange culture, strange custom, and she's there as a servant. I mean, she's told what to do. I think servant is probably a nice word for it. She's more like a slave, and whatever is demanded of her, then that's what she has to do. And the reason why her life is the way that it is because of this commander, this general of the army. And he gets a skin disease, probably called leprosy. Leprosy is a really horrible disease because you lose all of the sensation and nerve endings in your skin. And you don't know when it's infected, or you don't know when it's burnt, and it has all of these disfiguring qualities or characteristics. And so when I think of myself as this character, learning that the person who captured me and took me away from my family and my home got leprosy, I'd be like, oh yeah. Okay, I'm just being honest. I'd be like, yeah, good for him. Dirty, rotten scoundrel. He's going to die this horrible, death. It's justice. That's the way that it works. But so I find it very interesting that this first message here this morning is from someone who is powerless, someone who is voiceless, someone who is nameless, someone who's been mistreated, someone who's been marginalized, someone who's probably been abused. And yet, what she asks for is hope for someone else. And not just for anyone else, for someone who, by all accounts, was her oppressor. And so for her oppressor, she gives a message of hope, or speaks a message of hope. So this is message number one. I think there are a couple of things that we might be able to tease out of this here today. One is God often uses unlikely messengers. This is probably, and it's set up this way in the narrative account, it's set up to be surprising. Here's Naaman, and now we're going to start the story of his healing with this lowly girl that doesn't have a name, that doesn't have a position, that doesn't have status. And it kind of reminds me of the Easter account of the resurrection, that the first people to bear witness to the risen Lord were the women, who also, again, didn't have any authority to vote or to hold property or to actually give testimony in court, that they were not allowed to say this is what happened and anybody believe it. And whom were the first people to declare that Jesus Christ is risen and that the tomb is empty? Was the women. And so often God uses messages of hope, not from the pulpit or from people of prominence or people who have a high position or platform, but if we listen carefully, we'll hear some of the truest messages and some of the most hope-filled messages from people who don't have all of these positions and statuses, but even people who are what we call marginalized are people whom, if we listen to, we can hear God's message. So that's one thing. I think another thing is, how are you using your voice? So for those of us who have been in places where we feel like we have been mistreated and things haven't gone our way, and we feel like people have treated us wrongly and treated us poorly or taken advantages of us, are we giving messages of hope, or are we wanting things to go poorly or badly for them because we feel like we got mistreated, then we want something bad to happen to them as well? So I think it really calls us to deliver messages of hope no matter what we have experienced in our own lives. So that's message number 1. Let's look at message number 2. Starting with verse 5. So the king of Aram, then he sends this letter, but he also sends with the letter 10 talents of silver and 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 sets of garments. And so, again, I always like to figure out like what really is going on here, because these words don't mean anything to me. Talents, shekels, silver and gold I kind of understand. But I don't understand the weight, the measurements, and it's a little bit hard to convert over centuries weights and measures, but a rough estimate is with this letter, he sent about $1 million worth of silver and about $3 million worth of gold. And again, we can just glance over it in our reading, but it's like, I'm sending a big chunk of change here. And with these 10 sets of garments, about $4 million in this letter, the king is delivering a message. And the message is, I am important. I have expectations. Oh, and with my letter, it's the commander of the army. And the king of Israel gets this, and he begins to panic. He's like, what am I supposed to do? He's like, oh yeah, heal this guy of his leprosy, his skin disease. And he's like, I can't do that. He goes, I'm not God. I have no power. I have no authority. And for sure, if I don't deliver on this promise, that he's going to attack. That is, he just set me up for failure. He's baiting me. And his fear was due to powerlessness. He couldn't do anything about it. And then he assumed ill intent. He assumed that the king of Aram was up to no good. I was reading Dare to Lead recently by Brene Brown. And she's written some great works. I highly recommend them. She has some podcasts as well, Brene Brown. And so she was describing about how one time she was just swamped with work. She was working on all these projects. She had speaking engagements. She was writing another book. And she was working from her house. She had papers stacked all over and different files that she was working on, deadlines that were coming up. And her husband went to the kitchen in the room next, the room adjacent, and opened the refrigerator, sighed, and said, can't believe we have no lunch meat. Shut the refrigerator door. So she heard that, and she began to make up a story in her own mind, because a story of what she was already feeling. I'm not a good wife. I'm not a good mother. I'm not giving attention to my home. My husband's going to go hungry because there's no lunch meat in the house. And she comes storming out, and she's like, I'm doing the best I can, and you can shop too. She read all of that into, I can't believe there's no lunch meat. Why? Because she was feeling powerless, and she assumed ill intent. Her husband was like, the account is really great in the book, but the husband's like, how many years have we been married? And like, when's the last time you've gone shopping? So she's like, he's like, I'm the one who goes shopping. He goes, I'm upset because I forgot to buy the lunch meat the last time I was out and went shopping, because that's what I do in this house, is I do the shopping. But she didn't hear any of that because of what she was feeling and the story that she believed about herself. She assumed that others were passing along to her. And when we feel inadequate, when we feel like we're not measuring up, when we feel like we're less than, then we assume that every comment, every gesture, every look the person gives us is really reflecting what we already feel about ourselves. Like, I can't believe that they're looking at me and they're talking over there in the church. They're probably talking about me, because we're already in a place that is like low or less than. And so it's very important that we understand who we are, especially who we are in relationship to God, and we don't assume that everything is about us, and especially not assume that everything is about us when we're like in a low state, when we feel overwhelmed, or when we feel like we have too much going on. So that's message number 2. Message number 3, I really love. Verse 8, when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, which is basically like thrown a fit, right? Oh, you want to know how upset I am? Ugh, I am this upset. And now my clothes are ruined. Ugh. I'm glad we got over that custom. But we'll read it throughout the Bible. You'll see it. They tore their clothes. They rent their clothes. It just means like, I'm throwing a fit because I'm really upset. So he heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, and then he sent a message to the king. So we have all of these, messages that are happening here in this account. And he's like, why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel. And so Elisha's message was, just relax. Just relax. Send Naaman to me, and this is the message of God. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to panic. Just everything's going to be okay because God has it. And I want you to know that God's message is consistently that. Don't panic. Don't be scared. Things are going to be all right even when they don't look like they're going to be all right. You know why? Because God is in control. He has things, and He has us, and He wants us to be able to trust Him in every situation, in every circumstance. And this is a message that God tells us frequently, if we're able to hear it, is don't rip your clothes up. Don't throw a fit. Don't make a scene. Just calm down, relax, take a breath. So again, different messages that I'm giving out today, and I'm not sure which one's going to land with you. I'm hoping that one of them does. But one of them is take a breath. And I mean that quite literally. So we're going to practice here today. It's called square breathing. And so you might have heard of it before, but you take a breath in for 4. You hold for 4. You exhale for 4. And hold for 4. Can you do that with me? Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. And again, I'm not sure which part is going to land with you today, but if it's just practicing taking breaths when you feel overwhelmed and when you feel like things are out of control, I'm believing this morning that that's the message from God for you to be able to recognize I can trust Him even when I feel overwhelmed. Message number 4. Elisha, verse 10, I'm skipping down to verse 10. Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. But Naaman became angry and went away. I'm surprised he didn't tear his clothes, saying, I thought that for me, I love that phrase, I thought that for me, because I am commander of the army, highly favored, I'm big cheese, he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and would wave his hand over the spot and just cure the leprosy. And then he talks about different rivers that are better. It's like, let me washing clean rivers, not the dirty Jordan River. And so Naaman was insulted. He wanted drama. He wanted a spectacle. He had a very clear picture in his mind of how God would answer his prayer. He had a very clear picture in mind of how God would answer his prayer. Now here, it's talking about healing, like physical healing. But for me, I can relate to it best through like emotional healing or relational healing. I've been married to my wife almost 30 years, and it hasn't always been a healthy marriage. That there have been rough patches in that marriage, what I would describe it as being unhealthy or not really in a good place. And I have prayed to God for healing for my marriage. Not only have I prayed to God for healing for my marriage, but I had a certain picture of what that healing would look like. It would look like this. That my wife would be sleeping, and while she was sleeping, there would be a dream, and God would speak to her in this dream. Dana, this is God. Curtis is right. Pretty much all of the time. So you just need to listen to what he says. And then she would wake up the next morning and say, honey, you wouldn't believe what happened. And I'd be like, I have an idea of what happened. God came to me in a dream and recognized that I am the reason why our marriage is so horrible. Like, yes. Yes, this is right. This is good. And you know what? I'm thankful to say that God has healed our marriage, continues to heal our marriage, and it has looked nothing like that. You know what it's looked like? It's looked like God saying to me, Curtis, you're the problem. Stop being a jerk. Work on perspective taking and getting a better attitude. And so when I'm asking God for healing, and he encourages me in healing that I'm not particularly fond of, it's easy for me to say, no way. That's not how it works. I'm not the problem here. My coworker's the problem. My boss is the problem. My kids are the problem. Somebody else is the problem. And Naaman doesn't like how God wants to direct his next steps. And so he gets angry, he throws a fit, he's like, this isn't right. I had a picture of how God was going to do it, and this is not the picture. Let me say the picture of our marriage being healed in the process of healing did not look like all of the hard work that I needed to do, but I'm so thankful that I've done a lot, not all, but a lot of the hard work, and our marriage is in a much better place. And it was like washing in the dirty Jordan River. It felt yucky, and it wasn't great, and it wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't beautiful. It wasn't like a picture to see on the big screen. It was none of that. It was hard, uncomfortable, unsatisfying, really incremental work that had to be done. But in the end, that's how healing came about. Message number 5. We skip down to verse 13. So he turns away, last part of verse 12, he turns away in a rage. Yeah. Typical guy, right? I can't get my way. Verse 13. But his servants, again, so this is a disconnected power, right? So now it's his servants, and so we've seen that before. Now we're seeing it again. It was the maid servant earlier on, but now it's his servants. But his servants approached and said to him, so this is a move of courage, and a lot of times messages are messages of courage. His servants approached and said to him, Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said to you was wash and be clean? So the servant's message, after he had thrown this fit because it wasn't the way that he had pictured and envisioned that it would be, was the message of reason of the servant saying to him, you know, you might be wrong. And this is a really kind of helpful and powerful message in our lives. In my office, I have a painting of a Swedish warship, the Royal Warship Vasa. It was commissioned in 1628 by the King of Sweden, King Gustavus Adolphus. King Gustavus Adolphus commissioned this ship to be the best ship in the entire world. It had lots of huge masts, sails, and it had more cannon on it than any ship had ever had before. It had 2 rows of cannon on it. And so he was so proud of this ship to show how great he was, to show how in charge he was, to show how in control he was. And everybody that knew anything about shipbuilding was like, this thing is going to sink. And you know who told him about it? Nobody. Nobody told about it. Maiden voyage. Lots of fanfare, lots of people watching, sets out. And before it gets out of the harbor, it finds its way to the bottom of the harbor. Several people lost their lives. And it was later rescued. It's in a museum in Stockholm. But I have this painting in my office. And what I do is the people who are close to me that I work with, is I tell them this story. And I say, look at this ship. It looks great. But because nobody said this thing is not going to float, it sunk. I'm inviting you to tell me, as your supervisor, as your boss, whenever it looks like a project isn't going to work, just because I want it to, just because I think it's a great idea, just because there are lots of flashy cannon on it, if you see that it's not going to make it, if it's going to sink, then you need to be able to tell me that I'm wrong so that we don't all end up in the bottom of the harbor. And I think it's really important to put those types of people around us in our lives, because we can sometimes get fixated on a goal, on a plan, on a mission, and believe that we're right and want to prove something, and we can lose sight of the fact that this is not really a good idea. And if we have people that are there to tell us, you might be wrong, that can be one of the most powerful messages that we ever hear from God through others that we've put in our lives. Please save me from myself. So he listened. He listened, went down to the Jordan River. He washed 7 times. And this is what I have found for the healing, not of my skin, but for the healing of my diseased mind or my diseased thinking. I need repetition. I just need to hear over and over again, God loves me. He loves me for who I am. He cares for me. That I need this message, this repetition over and over again for it to really take root. He washed 7 times. He came up. He was cleansed. And he was whole. The final message today is in verse 15. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company. He came and stood before him and said, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. So what we learn from this is that God doesn't heal us. Again, whether physically or emotionally, spiritually, in our relationships, God doesn't heal us because we're rich or powerful or important. He heals us because he loves us. And the final message is, now I know. Now I know what God is like. Naaman didn't know what God was like at the beginning of the passage. By the end of the passage, he began to have a clear understanding. Now I know what God is like. He loves me for who I am, even when the message is all mixed up. So what did we learn today from these series of messages? I think the world is full of mixed up messages. Messages like our worth depends on our productivity, or our worth depends on our status. Mixed up messages from the world like we're not enough unless we look a certain way, or we're not enough unless we believe a certain way, or we're not enough unless we achieve a certain way. There are all types of messages floating in the world, messages that confuse power with success, messages that confuse the noise with truth. The louder it is, the longer we hear it, the more we tend to believe it. But into this swirl of confusion, God keeps sending a different message. And sometimes that message comes from the least likely voices, from the marginalized. Sometimes those messages come from a friendly, hard truth of, you might be wrong. And it may not be dramatic. It may not look like what we expected. It may be so simple that we miss it because we don't think it will really work. But yet, when we finally listen and we humble ourselves to hear God's message, we discover that healing and hope are not found in our strength, but they're found in God's grace. And that's the message that we need to hear and the one that we're called to carry. God bless you.
Wow, thank you so much. That was amazing. So, as you ponder that message and ponder this whole theme of He's blessed by us and in turn He blesses us, have a beautiful, unique day today. And if you're interested, this afternoon is our next Sunflower and Song. I'll be right here at 4:30. We'll just be singing inspirational songs and fun tunes and having a great time. Blessed be the name. If you would like to stand, and I noticed some of you did clap on the last one. If you want to just stand and worship with us one more time, blessed be your